Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I started this job 3 months ago. I'm the night caretaker in a commercial building downtown. Most floors have offices for lawyers, accountants, and tech startups. During the day, the lobby is busy. At night, it's all mine. I patrol the floors, check the doors, watch the cameras. It pays better than I expected, and I like the quiet. But people always ask me about the 13th floor. They say the building has a locked 13th floor that no one rents. The elevator buttons go from 12 to 14. There's no official acknowledgement of a 13th floor, yet on the paperwork I was given, there's a mention of an empty space on the plans. I assumed it was a design choice or some old superstition. I didn't think about it much at first. On my second week, I heard a noise while I was making my round. It came from above me. I had checked the 12th floor. It was empty, all offices closed. Then I heard something that sounded like a window sliding open. It was loud and echoed through the stairwell. I looked at my watch. It was a little after 2 in the morning, which is usually my most boring time. That noise startled me. I went back to the corridor and waited, trying to figure out where it came from. Then I heard it again, like someone sliding a window open, then shutting it fast. Metal scraping on metal. It gave me goosebumps. I took the flashlight out of my belt and headed to the elevator. I pressed 14. The elevator took me up, but the noise stopped. When I reached the 14th floor, I walked around. Everything was dark, but I checked every window. All locked. No sign of movement. I didn't see anything strange, so I shrugged it off and went back down. That same night, around 3:30, I heard it again. This time it was louder and followed by a bang, like a heavy shutter or panel. I ran to the elevator, ready to check floors 12 and 14 again. But when I stepped inside, the panel where the buttons are usually lit up in an odd way. The lights behind the numbers flickered. For a second, I thought I saw a faint button that said 13. It was there for half a second, then gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but there were only the usual numbers. I pressed 14. The elevator rose, but halfway up it felt like it slowed down. It made a weird grinding noise, then continued. On the 14th floor, everything was silent except for the low hum of the hallway lights. I tried the stairwell. I walked down to the 12th floor, shining my flashlight on the walls. Nothing. I felt an odd chill, so I checked the windows in the stairwell. All closed. I walked back to the lobby, a bit uneasy. Over the next few nights, the same noise came back, always around 2 or 3 in the morning. That distinct sliding and slamming of a window or something metallic. I kept trying to locate the source. Each time it felt like it was coming from above. I started to think it had to be on some hidden level, maybe behind some locked door. It didn't make sense because the building's official floors all seemed normal. I asked the day staff if they knew anything about the 13th floor. They laughed or changed the subject. The janitor who works days told me not to bother. He said the building owners never leased that floor and that I should leave it alone. No one ever gave me a direct reason. They just said it was blocked off during construction. One night, about a month into the job, I decided to take the stairs up from the lobby, floor by floor. I figured I'd see if there was some locked access door. The building has a door to the mechanical floors on 15 and 16, but that's for the AC system. Between 12 and 14, there's a narrow landing with a single locked door that has no label. I never noticed it before because it's tucked behind the main stairwell door. It's a dark gray metal door with a heavy chain wrapped around the handle. There's a padlock the size of my fist keeping it shut. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. I listened. Silence. So I went on with my shift. A week later, I heard the noise again, but this time it was followed by footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone walking down a corridor. Then a pause. Then the footsteps would resume. My heart pounded. It was around 2 in the morning again. I took the stairs up to that chained door. This time I stood there longer, pressing my ear against it. I heard a faint creaking noise, like a floorboard under pressure. The chain rattled slightly. I tested the padlock, but it was still secure. My flashlight started flickering. I smacked it with my palm, and the light steadied. Then I felt this weird shift of air, like a breeze through a gap. But the door looked sealed. I stayed a few more seconds. Then the footsteps stopped. Later that night, while I sat in the security office watching the camera feeds, a flicker caught my eye on the hallway camera for the 12th floor. It looked like a light turned on for a moment. I switched to the next camera, but everything was dark again. So I took the elevator up, stepped onto the 12th floor, and walked around. The place smelled stale, like dust and old carpet. Nothing unusual. On my way back to the elevator, I thought I heard something overhead. It was a muffled banging sound, then a scraping. I pressed my hand against the ceiling tile. It felt solid. I got back on the elevator, went to the lobby, and tried to shake it off. 2 weeks went by with the same pattern. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning, I'd hear the sliding noise. Sometimes it was slow and drawn out, sometimes sharp and loud. Once, I heard it 3 times in a row. I felt anxious every night, waiting for it. My stomach would tighten and I'd get sweaty palms around the time I expected the noise. One night, I lost patience and decided to do a thorough search. I started on the 12th floor at around 1:45 a.m. I checked every room. Nothing. Then I moved to the 14th. Same routine. As I walked the hallway, I heard a loud clang from behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but there was no one. I waited, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. Another clang, closer, then silence. I was breathing hard. I looked at the windows, tested them, all locked. I checked every door in that hallway. They were locked. I returned to the elevator, but before I pressed the button for the lobby, something clicked inside the elevator shaft. The elevator car didn't come. I pressed the button again. Nothing. So I took the stairwell. On the way down, I noticed the door on the unmarked landing was slightly ajar. The chain hung loose and the padlock lay on the floor. My chest tightened. I couldn't figure out who unlocked it. I picked up the padlock. It wasn't broken. It was open, as if someone had the key. I shined my flashlight into the gap. A dark hallway stretched beyond the door. It smelled stale. I pushed the door open a little more and it creaked. The hallway beyond it looked like a normal corridor at first, but the walls were a dull white, chipped in places. The floor was made of old linoleum tiles. I took a few steps inside, testing each step. My ears were on high alert. No footsteps, no voices. Just an odd, faint hum from somewhere deeper in the hallway. I told myself to turn back, but I kept going. I walked about 20 yards until I reached a corner. The corridor turned left. I looked around it with my flashlight. It kept going, but now there were doors on both sides. Plain, unmarked wooden doors. Some had faint scratches near the bottom, like someone had dragged a sharp object across them. The further I went, the more the air felt stagnant. I tasted dust on my tongue. My throat felt dry. I decided to test one of the doors. It turned out to be unlocked. I pushed it open and my flashlight revealed a small office-like room. Empty except for a single metal desk with nothing on it. The walls had marks that looked like scuffs or smudges. In one corner, I saw what looked like claw marks, 5 parallel lines etched into the plaster about 2 feet long. My stomach turned a bit. I stepped closer. The indentations were deep. I ran my fingertips over them. My skin prickled. I backed away, closed the door, and moved further down the hallway. As I went on, the corridor branched off in more directions. It was like a maze. Some hallways had burnt out ceiling lights, so I relied on my flashlight. More doors, more empty rooms, more scratch marks. In some places, I saw broken glass on the floor. In others, I saw footprints in the dust. They looked human but uneven, like someone was dragging one foot. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I kept going, even though every part of me wanted to leave. I needed to see where this would lead. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I heard the noise again, That same window slide sound followed by a loud bang. It came from deeper in the corridor or maybe above me. I picked up my pace, shining the light on each door I passed. Then the lights overhead started flickering. I froze. The flickering made it seem like the hallway was shifting. My head started pounding. I heard a voice, low and distant, calling something. At first I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a plea, something like help or please. My gut clenched. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small. I got no clear answer, just a faint moan. I pushed forward to another door that had a large scratch on it, almost carving the door in half. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. Inside was a larger room, maybe a conference room with a long table in the center. The table was covered in dust and had more scratch marks across its surface. The walls had torn bits of wallpaper. I heard that voice again. It sounded closer. "Let me out," it said. It was weak, drawn out, but clear enough. My heart pounded. I checked under the table. Nothing. I opened a small closet at the back. Empty. The voice came again, from the hallway now. "Let me out." Goosebumps rose on my arms. I followed the sound, stepping back into the corridor. My flashlight caught a flicker at the end of the hall. It looked like a shape moving into another passage. I hurried forward. That stale odor of dust grew stronger. I felt my mouth go dry. The hallway branched again, leading me to an area I didn't recognize. The carpeting changed color from brown to gray. The walls had fewer scuffs here, but the overhead lights were dead, so I relied on my flashlight. Every few seconds I heard that voice, almost like a whisper. "Let me out." Each time it sounded a bit more desperate. I found another door that looked different. This one was reinforced with a steel frame. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. I listened at the gap. Silence. I pushed it open with my foot, keeping my flashlight up. The smell inside was pungent, like damp paper and mildew. Stacks of old boxes filled the corners. The floor was sticky in places. I swept the beam around the room. More claw marks on the walls. A few broken wooden chairs piled against a corner. As I took a step inside, something behind me scraped against the floor. I spun around, shining the flashlight. Nobody was there, but the door had moved slightly, as if nudged from the outside. I swallowed hard. I felt my heart hammering. My thoughts raced. I wanted to call for backup, but who would I call? The building security code says I'm the only caretaker on duty. I inched back into the corridor. My flashlight started flickering again. A low hum filled my ears. It felt like pressure building behind my eyes. The voice came once more, almost in my ear, though no one was there. "Let me out," it said, louder this time. I nearly dropped my flashlight. I forced myself to stay calm. The corridor ahead was darker than before, as if the lights had shut off completely. I could see a faint glow coming from around the next corner, a greenish hue like an emergency light. I took slow steps, ignoring the sweat dripping down my forehead. My pulse throbbed in my temples. When I reached that corner, I noticed a window at the end of the hallway. It was a large window with a rusted metal frame. It was closed and locked, yet I heard that same sliding sound right as I approached it. I watched the window rattle, even though there was no wind. I reached out to touch it. The glass felt ice cold. Suddenly it slid up on its own, then slammed shut with a bang. I stumbled back, gasping for air. My throat felt tight. The voice said, "Let me out," again, but I couldn't tell if it came from behind the window or deeper in the corridor. My skin crawled. I looked behind me. The hallway stretched back in a way I couldn't recognize. It looked longer than before, with more doors. I felt trapped in that place. A wave of dizziness hit me. My mind was screaming to leave. I turned around and ran back the way I thought I came. My flashlight beam jumped across the walls, revealing more scratches, some forming deep gouges. My footsteps echoed, and the corridor seemed to curve. I kept going, turning corners, trying to retrace my path. Each time I ended up in a similar hallway with the same scuffed walls. My eyes teared up with panic. I couldn't find the stairwell door. I could feel my chest tighten. My legs shook. Finally, I spotted the chain and padlock on the floor again. It was near that original metal door. The door was wide open. I lunged for it, tripping on my own feet, nearly slamming into the doorframe. I glanced back into the darkness of that corridor. I couldn't see anything moving, but I felt a presence, like something watching me from the gloom. My entire body was tense. I scooped up the padlock, dashed through the doorway, and pulled the door shut behind me with all my strength. It creaked, but closed. I wrapped the chain around the handle, fumbling with the padlock until it clicked. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me a few tries. When it finally locked, I let out a shaky breath and hurried down the stairs. Once I reached the lobby, I went straight to my security desk and sat down. My head pounded. My face was slick with sweat. I tried to get my breathing under control. I stared at the monitors, but all I saw were empty hallways and dark offices. Normal floors with normal closed doors. The phone sat on the desk. I thought about calling the building manager or maybe the police. But what would I say? There was no crime. There were just impossible rooms and weird noises. My hands kept shaking, so I grabbed a bottle of water from the mini fridge and gulped it down. I took a few deep breaths and tried to steady myself. I decided not to mention it to anyone the next morning. I stayed until my shift ended at 6. I walked outside, saw the sunrise, and felt a rush of relief. Since then, I still hear the window noises at night. Sometimes they're mild, sometimes they're loud. I pretend I don't hear them. I check the floors I can access, but I avoid that unmarked door. I feel my throat get dry. It's just the angle of the light, but it makes my skin prickle. I hear a click behind me. It's a soft noise, almost like a shoe tapping the floor. I spin around, shining my flashlight back toward Lincoln. The statue is still in its place, but I could swear it was angled differently when I first entered the room. I stare for a few seconds, feeling my heartbeat pick up. Then I shrug it off. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Maybe the angle of the flashlight changed. I remind myself there are no visitors and the museum's doors are locked. I finish my first round without any more strange sounds. I sit back in the security office, fill out the log with the time, and note that everything seems normal. I try not to think about that little click I heard near Lincoln's statue. I check my phone for messages, sip some cold coffee from the pot in the corner, and wait for the next round. Around midnight, I walk out again. The building is quiet. The overhead lights are still dim, and the walls seem to stretch further at night. My footsteps sound heavier now, and I catch myself holding my breath. I pass by the historical figures again. Lincoln looks the same. Napoleon stands just like before, his stern face aimed forward. I notice a new detail. Cleopatra's statue is on a small platform to the left. She's lying in a regal pose. I point my flashlight at her face. Her eyes look glossy. For a moment, they seem wet. My chest feels tight. Then the overhead light flickers. The room goes dark, and I stop breathing for a second. I hold still, flashlight pointed at Cleopatra. In that second of total darkness, I hear a soft breath near me. It's just one breath, quick and warm. The lights come back on and everything is as it was. But now my arms are covered in goosebumps. I move on to the folklore section. This area is where they keep figures like mythical outlaws, rumored witches, and other mysterious characters. There's a statue of a rumored voodoo priestess, Marie Laveau, in the back corner. She's dressed in period clothing, staring forward with a faint smile. I don't like going near that statue. The details on her face are unsettling. I shine my flashlight on her. She looks calm. Her hands rest on her lap and her head tilts slightly to the side. I feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, as if something's watching me from behind. I turn around quickly, but there's nothing there. I keep going. I return to the security office, try to calm down and take a few gulps of water. My mouth is dry. I keep hearing that breath in my head. I tell myself it's just the air conditioning or maybe a random hiss from the vents. But I know the difference between mechanical noises and an actual breath. My body feels tense and my heartbeat is faster than usual. I can't settle down. At 1 in the morning, I start the third round. I decide to walk a bit faster. I want to get it done. I step into the main hall, pass by Lincoln, and see that his head is turned a few degrees to the left. I stop walking. My heart feels like it's pounding against my ribs. I check the base of the statue. There's a little scuff mark on the floor, as if something scraped it. My hands shake a bit as I shine the flashlight around. I don't see footprints or anything else, just that small scratch on the floor. It doesn't make sense, and I stand there wondering if I should call someone. But who would I call? The police wouldn't believe me if I said a statue moved. I press on. The overhead light flickers again. The hallway is dark for maybe 2 seconds this time, long enough for my pulse to spike. I feel sweat on my forehead. Then the lights come back. Everything in the hallway looks normal, but my head is racing. I walk past Napoleon. He seems closer to the edge of his platform. My flashlight trembles in my hand. I think about stepping back, but I force myself to keep going. I want to finish my route. When I reach the folklore area, I notice a slight shift in the positions of the statues. They're arranged in a semicircle, and normally each one faces the center. Now one is angled toward the entrance. It's a figure of a legendary pirate. I think it's supposed to be Blackbeard, but the label just says, "Infamous Buccaneer." He's holding a cutlass and his eyes have a piercing stare. I swear his head wasn't tilted before. My legs feel weak. I go straight to the next corridor without lingering. Back in the security office, I try to distract myself by digging through some old files. I see an envelope labeled Restoration Notes. I flip through the pages. There are references to some kind of ritual the original sculptor used, something about capturing the essence of wandering souls. It's all written in old handwriting, like someone tried to make notes in a hurry. I read a paragraph that says, "The figure's realism depends on the sacrifice of spiritual fragments." I don't know what it means, but it makes my skin crawl. Another page mentions that the wax was mixed with certain materials during a ceremony. The instructions talk about an incantation. I shut the folder because it's making my stomach churn. I stand up to start another round, but my knees feel shaky. I step into the hallway and decide I need to see if the statues are really moving or if I'm losing my mind. I turn on my phone camera. I walk into the main hall and film Abraham Lincoln for a few seconds. Then I point my camera toward Napoleon. I capture Cleopatra. Everything stays still. I wait for the flicker of the overhead lights. It happens, and the hallway goes dark. My camera is still recording. In that instant, I hear a clear shuffle from the left. Then a breath next to my ear. My heart thumps so hard that I gasp. The lights come back, and I see that Cleopatra is no longer facing forward. Her head is turned to the left, her chin angled down like she's looking at the floor. I stare at her face, and I realize her expression has changed. Her lips are parted slightly, and her eyebrows look tense, like she's worried or in pain. I step back, shaking. My pulse feels out of control. I review the footage on my phone. In the darkness, there's a faint outline of movement, but the video is too blurry to confirm anything. I keep hearing that breath in the audio playback. It sounds close, like someone exhaling right into the microphone. I can't handle the silence anymore. I walk quickly back to the office, lock the door, and try to calm down. I open my laptop and search for anything related to the museum's history. Most articles talk about its founder, a sculptor who died years ago. They describe him as eccentric. They mention rumors that he believed in spiritual attachments. One article mentions a group of mediums who visited the museum decades ago. The mediums apparently said they felt strange presences around the statues. The article doesn't go into detail, but it's enough to make my skin prickle again. I force myself to do the next round because it's in my contract, and I don't want to lose this job. I tell myself that I just need to get through the night. I can reconsider in the morning. It's around 2:30 in the morning now, and the entire building feels colder than before. My breath feels tight in my chest. I walk, pointing my flashlight straight ahead, ignoring the flickering lights. I pass Lincoln. His eyes look slightly lower, almost like he's staring at my feet. I keep walking. Napoleon's statue is now turned to the side like it's pivoted. Cleopatra's face has that strained expression. I move into the folklore section. The pirate statue is leaning forward. The base is a few inches from where it should be. I see faint marks on the floor, like the base was dragged. My throat feels thick, and I swallow hard. Then I approach Marie Laveau's figure. She's the one I hate the most. The detail is so exact, right down to her fingernails. My flashlight flickers and I realize my batteries are dying. The overhead lights don't help much because they keep dimming. I get close enough to see her face. Her eyes look different than before. Her lips are parted, and I notice what seems like the glint of teeth. I back away, feeling a chill run up my spine. My arms feel weak, and my hands are damp with sweat. The overhead lights flicker again, and for 2 or 3 seconds it's pure darkness. In that darkness, I sense movement to my left. I hear a distinct shuffle against the floor and then a sharp click, like something tapping on wood. My chest tightens. My breathing gets shallow. The lights come back on and I see that Marie Laveau is not facing forward anymore. Her entire body is angled toward me, and her right arm is extended a bit. The distance between us is smaller. My heart feels like it's going to jump out of my chest. I don't scream. I just turn around and bolt for the main hall. When I reach the hall, I realize the statues of Lincoln and Napoleon have shifted again. They're closer to each other, almost side by side. Their heads are turned in my direction. My stomach twists and I run toward the security office. Once I get inside, I slam the door shut and lock it. I lean against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My heart rate is out of control and my forehead is covered in sweat. I sit at the desk and stare at the small monitor that shows the security cameras. Most of the feeds are black and white. I see flickers now and then because the lights are unstable. For a moment, I watch Cleopatra's exhibit. She doesn't move on the screen, but it's hard to see detail in that low-quality feed. I switch to the folklore wing camera. I see Marie Laveau's statue. It's just a faint silhouette in the corner. I keep staring, and then I notice a slight jerk in the image. I can't tell if it's a glitch or if the statue actually moved. My heart pounds harder. I decide I can't hide in the office all night. The next round is at 3:30. If I skip it, I'll have to explain myself. I tell myself I'll do one more pass. That's it. I put fresh batteries in my flashlight. My palms feel sweaty, and I'm trembling a bit. The air in the office feels stale. I crack the door open and peer into the hallway. It's empty and quiet. I step out and walk slowly, flashlight pointed ahead. Every step feels heavy. I reach the main hall. Lincoln's statue is back in its original position. Napoleon stands where he should be. But their expressions look different. Both have a slight downward twist to their lips like they're grimacing. I keep moving, not stopping. The overhead lights flicker off again. This time, the darkness lasts longer, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. I hear a quick scuffle of feet. My chest tightens. I grip my flashlight and stay still. I feel a warm breath against my ear, and the hair on my arms stands up. The lights come on, and the statues are all in place again, as if they've never moved. I move on to the folklore section, shining my flashlight around. My heart is pounding so hard that I feel it in my temples. I reach Marie Laveau's statue. She looks normal, sitting there with her hands on her lap. The faint smile is back. I exhale, trying to calm down. Then I realize there's a small scratch on her cheek as if the wax got chipped. I look closer and notice something dark near the scratch. It looks like a tiny stain. I can't tell what it is, but I get a wave of nausea just seeing it. I step back. I'm done. I rush back to the security office. I stare at the clock on the wall. It's only 3:45. I still have a few hours left in my shift. I feel exhausted. My thoughts are jumbled. I wonder if I should just leave, but I don't want to get in trouble. So I sit in the chair, eyes glued to the camera feeds, waiting for time to pass. The lights flicker a couple more times, but I don't leave the office again. Every time the corridor goes dark, I feel my heart spike, and I grip the arms of the chair until my knuckles turn white. At 6 in the morning, the head of security returns. He finds me pale and shaking in the office. I don't say much. I just hand him the clipboard with my notes. I don't mention the footsteps or the moving statues. I don't talk about the breath on my neck or the changed expressions. I grab my stuff and walk out of there without looking back. As I step onto the street, I feel the morning air on my face. My limbs are stiff, and my eyes burn. I take a deep breath and decide that I need to find another job. I know what I experienced in those halls, and I don't plan to see it again. I remember the first moment I spotted that old wind instrument. It was sitting on a wooden table in a crowded bazaar. The rest of the stalls had the usual junk: old lampstands, dusty books, chipped dishes. But this piece caught my eye because of those strange patterns carved into its surface. They looked like spirals twisting around one another, and they reflected the sunlight in a dull, almost oily way. I felt a slight chill when I ran my fingertips along the surface. It felt cold, even though the day was warm and humid. The vendor was busy haggling with someone else, so I just set a few bills down on the table and left with the instrument in my hand. I thought it might be a neat conversation piece for my street performances. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. When I got home, I placed the instrument on my kitchen counter. It had a thin metal mouthpiece and a body that looked like wood covered in faded bronze inlays. The arabesques were detailed, but they didn't form any pattern I recognized. I tried to see if there were any letters or writing hidden among the lines, but it looked more like random curls and loops. I thought about cleaning it, but I didn't want to damage the designs. I'm a street musician. I play guitar, sometimes harmonica, and I sing for tips on crowded sidewalks. I rarely mess around with wind instruments, but this thing fascinated me. I decided to practice with it in private first. That same afternoon, I pressed it to my lips and blew a few times. It made a weak sound, like air passing through a narrow tube. It wasn't pleasant. I figured I just needed to find the right technique, but it seemed to resist me. I noticed the mouthpiece felt rough against my lips, almost abrasive. It left a strange metallic taste in my mouth, and I had to swish some water around just to get rid of it. That night, I left the instrument on top of a small cabinet in the living room and went to bed. The next morning, I felt a bit silly because I had dreamed about hearing a faint whistle echoing in my apartment. It sounded like someone trying to tune a flute in the corner of the room. I brushed it off. I assumed it was the usual random dream that follows you when you're thinking about a new musical toy. For a few days, I didn't touch the instrument much. I was busy with my usual routine, playing my guitar on different streets around the city. Sometimes I'd glance at the instrument before leaving the house, but I never took it out with me. It didn't feel right, like it was incomplete or broken. I kept thinking about that rough mouthpiece and the weird taste. Late one night, around midnight, I got curious again. I was in my living room, awake, feeling restless. I turned on a small lamp, took the instrument from its spot, and sat on the couch. It was exactly 12:15 a.m. when I decided to give it another try. I placed the mouthpiece between my lips, inhaled through my nose, and blew as steadily as I could. At first I heard just a soft hiss. Then I adjusted my tongue and tried a slightly different angle. That's when I produced a high-pitched note that made my teeth vibrate. The sound cut through the silence of the apartment like a sharp blade slicing through dense fabric. My ears started ringing, and I felt the hair on my arms rise. I stopped immediately, startled by how loud and shrill it was. The note kept echoing against the walls, bouncing from corner to corner, even after I took the instrument away from my mouth. It was like a delayed feedback loop that kept resonating, growing softer, but still there. I stood up. My legs felt shaky and my heart was pounding. That echo should have died out in a second or two, but I still heard it faintly hovering in the hallway. I set the instrument on the couch and walked toward the hallway entrance. I heard what sounded like a muffled wail. It didn't sound like a person. It was more like wind passing through a narrow gap in a window, except it had an almost sobbing tone. I leaned forward, looking into the darkness of the corridor, but I didn't see anything. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed a slight drip of sweat rolling down my temple. I flipped on the hallway light, but nothing was there. That night, I placed the instrument in a storage trunk in my bedroom. I locked the trunk with a small padlock. I figured I'd just keep it out of sight and mind. I didn't sleep well. I dreamed of distant howling sounds, and every time I jolted awake, I realized I was listening for that note again. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint whistling coming from the living room, but it stopped by the time I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. The following day, I felt drained, like I had barely slept. After I got back from playing guitar downtown, I noticed a weird chill in my apartment. The weather outside was still hot, but the inside of my place felt a few degrees cooler. I touched the walls in the hallway and sensed moisture. The paint felt slightly damp, and there were these small dark spots forming near the ceiling. They weren't big enough to see any shape, but it was unsettling. I opened a few windows to let some air in. I checked for leaks, but nothing looked obviously broken. By the time night fell, the temperature inside felt normal again. I remember pacing around my living room, not wanting to go to bed. Around midnight, I heard it. That same piercing note, followed by a hollow whistle echoing off the walls. My skin prickled and my breath caught in my throat. I rushed to my bedroom, unlocked the trunk, and found the instrument where I'd left it. It was cold to the touch, like it had been in a freezer. I ran my hand around the trunk, checking for a draft, but there was none. I lifted the instrument to my ear. I heard a faint hum, like distant wind swirling. My chest felt tight. I put the instrument back inside, closed the trunk, and locked it again. The next morning, the hallway walls had more dark spots, and they seemed to form curved lines, almost like the same spirals that were carved into the instrument. I touched them, and my finger came away stained with a dark residue that smelled earthy like wet soil. My stomach clenched, and I wiped my hand on a rag. I opened all the windows again and tried to air the place out. I wiped the walls down with hot water and soap, scrubbing until the stains disappeared. But when I stepped back, I still saw faint outlines. They were almost invisible, but I couldn't unsee them. I put on a fan and left the apartment, hoping everything would dry out and go back to normal. That day, I couldn't focus on my street performance. My mind kept going back to the bizarre events at home. My hands trembled on the guitar strings, and I kept missing chords. I only stayed out for a couple of hours before heading back. When I opened the front door, the apartment smelled stale and cold. I noticed water droplets on the hallway floor. The walls looked damp again, and the stains had returned. They were darker now, forming loops and symbols that I couldn't ignore. They reminded me of shapes I'd seen in old illustrations of obscure rites or something like that, though I never studied that stuff in detail. That night I made a mistake. I decided to confront the situation head-on. I took the instrument out of the trunk. It felt heavier than before. I carried it into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. I tried to keep the lights on so I wouldn't feel like I was walking into a horror movie scene, but the overhead bulb flickered a bit. It wasn't comforting. I sat across from the table and just stared at the instrument. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. My arms felt clammy. I thought about blowing into it again just to see what would happen, but something in me resisted. My mouth felt dry and my jaw felt tight. Instead, I grabbed a small cloth and tried to examine the carvings. As I rubbed the cloth along the surface, I uncovered more intricate lines. Some spots looked chipped or worn, revealing what seemed like older markings underneath the top layer of designs. They were symbols, spirals, loops, and crescents, all overlapping. Suddenly, my living room went silent. My refrigerator stopped humming. The sound of traffic outside seemed to fade. I felt pressure in my ears like I was in a soundproof booth. Then a soft, moaning tone started to rise in the room. It came from nowhere, but it was the same tone I heard that first night, the one that sounded like wind caught in a tunnel. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got goosebumps all over my arms. My chest tightened, and my breathing turned shallow. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up, grabbed the instrument, and sprinted to my bedroom. I shoved it back in the trunk, locked it, and then pushed the trunk into my closet. I threw an old blanket over it. But even then, I heard that faint wail behind me, almost mocking. I slammed the closet door shut and rushed back to the living room. I turned on music on my phone, some random playlist, just to drown out any lingering sounds. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I slept on the couch that night. I didn't rest well. Every little noise made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard water dripping. I got up to check the sink, but it was dry. The dripping sound continued, and I followed it to the hallway. The walls were wet again, and small rivulets of water trickled down in random patterns. Those patterns formed curves that looked just like the carvings on the instrument. I had to fight the urge to scream. My hands shook, and my stomach felt knotted. I grabbed towels from the bathroom and tried to soak up the moisture, but it just kept coming back, seeping through the paint. I kept wiping until my wrists started to ache. Eventually, I gave up and slumped to the floor. I stayed there, listening to that faint dripping and the low whistle that seemed to be hiding in the corners of my apartment. The next morning, I called in sick to the spot where I usually perform. I had no energy to go outside. The environment in my apartment felt oppressive, like the air was heavy. It was humid and chilly at the same time, which didn't make sense. I decided to do some research. I looked up the type of instrument I had, searching for keywords like ancient wind instrument with carvings and ritual instrument with arabesques. I clicked on a few shady sites until I found references to older cultures that supposedly used special flutes or pipes to call on wind spirits. They mentioned how those who played them after midnight risked creating a bond with these unseen forces. The texts said that once the bond was formed, the spirits demanded recognition. I felt a knot in my gut when I realized the shapes on my walls resembled images I found in those articles. They showed swirling lines that represented gusts of wind and arcs that symbolized gates or portals. One site suggested that people use such instruments in group ceremonies, standing in circles, chanting, and playing them to harness storms. Another site claimed that these instruments fed on the player's breath and fear, growing stronger every time they were used. I tried to stay logical, but I felt panic crawling up my spine. My hands were getting clammy again. I walked to the closet and opened the trunk. The instrument was still there, silent. It looked duller than before, like it had lost some of its luster, yet it felt like it was waiting for me. I slammed the trunk shut. I paced around my apartment thinking of a plan. I wanted to get rid of it, but I worried that might make things worse. What if it made these forces angry? I felt ridiculous for thinking that, but my nerves were fried. The constant cold and dampness were wearing me down. That evening, I wrapped the instrument in 2 thick towels and stuck it in a locked cabinet in the hallway. I was hoping that layering it away would keep it quiet. I went back to the living room and watched some TV, trying to stay distracted. Around midnight, I heard that same shrieking note blaring through the walls. It made my ears ring and my eyes water. It was sharper than before, and it felt like it was drilling into my skull. I jumped off the couch and ran to the cabinet. The door was still locked, but the inside rattled like something was trying to get out. I could see the door shaking, and I heard a faint scratching sound from within. I didn't dare open it. I backed away and grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, maybe a friend or a neighbor. But I felt too embarrassed to explain. I just stood there, phone in hand, while this horrifying note kept echoing. The walls started to sweat again. Moisture poured down in small streams, forming dark streaks that twisted into those cursed symbols. My breath came in short gasps, and my pulse throbbed in my temples. I felt a deep chill in my limbs. My legs were weak, and I sank to my knees. The note eventually faded, leaving a buzzing in my ears. I realized I couldn't let this go on. The apartment was getting warped by these forces. My possessions felt clammy. The floor was cold, and there was a damp smell everywhere. I decided to try taking the instrument far away, somewhere nobody would find it. The next morning, I grabbed the cabinet key and forced myself to open it. The instrument was still inside, wrapped in the towels. I felt a wave of nausea just looking at it. My hands shook as I lifted it out. The metal mouthpiece felt even rougher, as if corroded by some reaction. I took a deep breath and stuffed the instrument into a thick garbage bag. I tied it shut and placed it in my old gym bag. I planned to drive out to a remote area outside the city. I didn't have a clear idea of what I'd do. Maybe I'd toss it in a river or bury it in the woods. I just needed it gone. The drive was tense. My knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel. I kept glancing at the gym bag on the passenger seat. Part of me expected the bag to move or make a noise, but it stayed still. I found a deserted field with some dense brush. I pulled over on the shoulder. The air felt stagnant and the sky was overcast. I could smell dirt and grass. I dug a shallow hole with a small folding shovel I'd brought. Every scrape of metal against the ground made my heart pound. My palms were sweaty. Finally, I placed the bag in the hole and kicked the dirt back over it. I stomped it down until I couldn't see any sign of a mound. Then I jogged back to my car and left. The entire ride home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. My pulse was fast and my chest felt tight. When I got home, the apartment still felt cold and damp, but there was no new dripping. The walls still had those faint outlines, though they seemed lighter. I opened all the windows, turned on fans, and let the place air out. By nightfall, I didn't hear any strange notes or wailing. I slept on the couch again, clutching a flashlight. I woke up a few times, listening for noises, but everything stayed quiet. As the days passed, the apartment gradually dried out. The temperature returned to normal. The dark symbols on the walls faded enough that a fresh coat of paint would cover them. I still felt uneasy, but at least I could function again. I even managed to go back to my street performances, though I kept looking over my shoulder. Every so often, I thought I heard a faint whistle in the distance, but it might have been the wind or a passing car. I don't know if I'm truly free of whatever that instrument carried. I feel a lingering tension in my muscles, and at night, I sometimes wake up expecting to hear that terrible note. But as of now, my apartment is quiet and dry. I'm still on edge, waiting for some new sign that those spirits followed me. I haven't mentioned it to many people because I don't think they'd believe me. I just say I had some plumbing issues. It's easier that way. I won't forget the feeling of that cold, carved surface against my hands. I won't forget that sharp, piercing sound that echoed in my head for days. And I won't forget the wet walls and those swirling marks that seem to creep out of nowhere. Part of me worries that something like this might happen again, but all I can do is keep living and hope I left that nightmare behind. For now, I'm grateful my walls are dry and my nights are quiet. I still feel a chill sometimes, but I can handle a little cold. At least it's better than listening to that awful wail in the dark.